Every species in the galaxy had a warning. It was not written in any book. It was not stored in any archive. It lived in whispers. It lived in the silence that followed whenever someone mentioned the small blue world at the edge of the Orion Arm. The warning was simple: do not go there. Do not provoke them. Do not test them. But warnings, no matter how loud, are useless to those who believe they are too powerful to fall. And so, on the first day of what the Drenari High Command called Operation Silent Thunder, 10,000 warships crossed the border into human space. It was supposed to be a quick campaign, a simple show of force, a reminder to the younger species that the galaxy had rules, and those rules were not written by creatures who had only discovered fire a few thousand years ago. Almost none of those ships ever came back. This is the story of what happened to them. This is the story the galaxy still refuses to tell out loud. The Drenari were tall creatures. Their skin was the color of dark stone, and their eyes glowed with a faint orange light that made them look like they were always angry. In truth, most of them were. The Drenari had ruled their section of the galaxy for over 9,000 years. They had conquered 47 species. They had burned entire worlds to glass. They had built an empire so large that light itself took centuries to cross it from one end to the other. And in all that time, no one had ever told them no. Their leader was High Commander Vorath. He was old even by Drenari standards. His body was covered in the scars of 100 campaigns, and his left arm had been replaced by a mechanical limb made from the bones of a species he had personally driven to extinction. He sat in his command chair aboard the flagship Unkindness, a warship so massive that it had its own gravity field and its own weather system inside its hangars. Around him, his officers moved with the quiet efficiency of creatures who had done this many times before. Invasion was not new to them. It was routine. "Report," Vorath said. His voice was low and rough, like two rocks grinding together. His second-in-command, a younger Drenari named Selthar, stepped forward. Selthar was ambitious. He had requested this assignment because he believed the conquest of human space would earn him a promotion. He had studied the humans for months. He had read their communications. He had watched their broadcasts, and he had come to a conclusion that would later prove to be the worst mistake of his life. "The humans are divided," Selthar said. He projected a map of human space onto the main screen. It showed a scattering of colonies spread across a few dozen star systems. Compared to the Drenari Empire, it looked like a child's drawing. They have no central military command. Their governments argue with each other constantly. Their weapons technology is at least 2 generations behind ours, and their total fleet numbers less than 800 combat-capable vessels. A murmur went through the bridge. 800 ships against 10,000. The math was so one-sided that some of the officers actually laughed. Vorath did not laugh. He never did. But he allowed himself a thin smile. "And their defenses?" "Scattered," Selthar said. "They have monitoring stations along their border, but nothing that could stop a fleet of this size. We estimate full control of their space within 30 standard rotations. 30 days to conquer an entire species. It was almost too easy." Vorath looked at the map for a long time. He studied the small dots that represented human worlds. Earth, Mars, the colonies on Titan and Europa, the mining stations in the asteroid belt, the newer settlements around Proxima Centauri and Tau Ceti. All of them looked fragile. All of them looked like they were waiting to be taken. "There have been warnings," Vorath said slowly. "The Thessani told us to avoid human space. The Calvori refused to join this campaign because of the humans. Even the Merchant Guild has placed restrictions on trade near their borders. Why?" Selthar hesitated. This was the part of his briefing he had hoped to skip. "There are stories, High Commander, rumors. The Thessani claimed that a scouting party they sent into human space 60 years ago was never heard from again. The Calvori say that humans once destroyed an entire pirate fleet using weapons that no one has been able to identify. And there is a persistent rumor that the humans once fought a war among themselves that killed over 70 million of their own kind in less than 6 years." The bridge went quiet. 70 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. "Among themselves?" Vorath asked. "Yes, High Commander. They call it a world war. They have had several." Vorath considered this. A species that killed 70 million of its own members in a single conflict. A species that did this more than once. He tried to imagine what that said about them. Were they savage, undisciplined, or were they something else entirely? He dismissed the thought. Numbers were numbers, and his numbers were overwhelming. 10,000 ships, 3 million soldiers, weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Whatever the humans were, they were not ready for this. Begin the advance, he ordered. The fleet moved like a dark cloud through space. 10,000 ships arranged in a formation that stretched across millions of kilometers. Destroyers on the outside, cruisers in the middle, the heavy battleships and carriers at the center, and at the very heart of it all, the unkindness glowing with the cold light of its engines like an angry star. They crossed the border into human space on what the humans called a Tuesday. There was no resistance at the border, no fleet waiting for them, no warning shots, just empty space and silence. The monitoring stations they passed were dark and abandoned. The humans had already pulled back. Selthar took this as a sign of fear. They are running, he told Vorath. As predicted, they do not have the strength to face us. Vorath said nothing. He was watching his senses, and something about the emptiness bothered him. In his experience, a retreating enemy was either weak or smart, and he had learned long ago that the two were very different things. The first human system they reached was a small colony called Haven. It orbited a yellow star about 12 light-years inside the border. According to their intelligence, Haven had a population of about 200,000 humans and a small garrison of perhaps 50 military personnel. It was a farming colony, peaceful, undefended. Vorath sent a standard surrender demand. The message was simple: surrender your world. Disarm your forces. Submit to Draenari authority. You will not be harmed if you comply. The response came back within minutes. It was a single line of text, sent on an open channel so that every ship in the fleet could hear it. Come and take it. Selthar stared at the message. That is their entire response? It appears so, the communications officer said. They are bluffing, Selthar said. They have no choice but to surrender. Send the landing force. Vorath held up his mechanical hand. Wait. He read the message again. Come and take it. 3 words. No negotiation. No plea for mercy. No attempt to buy time. Just a challenge. A cold, direct challenge from a colony of farmers to a fleet that could burn their world to nothing. Something about it made the old commander uneasy. Scan the planet, he ordered, full spectrum. I want to know everything. The scan came back clean. No hidden weapons, no underground bunkers, no energy signatures that suggested advanced technology. Just farms and small towns and 200,000 humans going about their lives as if a fleet of 10,000 warships had not just appeared in their sky. They are either very brave or very foolish, Vorath said. Foolish, Selthar said confidently. Permission to begin the landing, High Commander? Vorath gave a slow nod. He did not like this, but he could not justify hesitation based on a feeling. Not in front of his officers, not in front of the fleet. The first wave consisted of 500 transport ships, each carrying 1,000 Draenari soldiers. They descended toward Haven in a standard invasion pattern, spreading out across the planet's surface to seize key locations: the capital city, the power stations, the communication arrays, the spaceport. The transports entered the atmosphere without incident. They passed through the clouds and began their final approach. Below them, the planet looked green and peaceful. Rivers cut through wide valleys. Fields of crops stretched to the horizon. Small towns dotted the landscape like white stones scattered on a green cloth. There was no other way to describe it. The fields themselves seemed to split apart, and from beneath them rose structures that had not appeared on any scan. Metal towers, weapons platforms, defense systems that unfolded from the earth like flowers blooming in fast motion. They had been buried, hidden beneath meters of soil and growing crops. Invisible to every sensor that Draenaradi possessed. The first shots hit the lead transports before anyone on board could react. Beams of concentrated energy cut through the hulls like hot wire through wax. Transport ships that had survived dozens of invasions were torn apart in seconds. Debris rained down across the farmland, and the burning wreckage of Draenari ships carved long black scars across the green fields. What is happening? Selthar shouted. His screen was filled with red warning symbols. Ship after ship was going dark, They were waiting for us, Vorath said quietly. There was no panic in his voice, only the cold recognition of a trap that had been sprung perfectly. The farms, the empty border, the abandoned stations. They wanted us to come in. They wanted us close. In the first 4 minutes of the Battle of Haven, the Draenari lost 112 transport ships and nearly 90,000 soldiers. The human colony of 200,000 farmers killed more Draenari in 4 minutes than the Kelvori resistance had managed in 20 years of war. And that was only the beginning. The surviving transports tried to pull back, but the human defense systems were designed to create overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. Ships that turned to flee were hit from behind. Ships that tried to go higher were caught by orbital defense platforms that rose from the planet's oceans, breaching the surface like great metal whales and locking onto their targets with terrifying accuracy. Vorat watched the slaughter on his screens and felt something he had not felt in over a century of warfare. He felt doubt, not fear. Not yet, but doubt. A cold, quiet voice in the back of his mind that asked a question he had never had to ask before. What if we are not the predators here? He pushed the thought away and began issuing orders. He pulled the remaining transports back. He ordered his warships to begin orbital bombardment of the defense positions. He deployed his fighter squadrons to provide cover for the retreating troops. He did everything that a commander of his experience should do, but the humans were ready for that too. As the Draenari warships moved into bombardment range, they detected something new. Thousands of small objects rising from the planet's surface. They were too small to be ships, too fast to be missiles. They moved in swirling patterns that no targeting computer could predict, changing directions so rapidly that they seemed to flicker in and out of existence. What are those? Selfar asked. His voice had lost its confidence. Drones, the sensor officer said. Autonomous weapons platforms. Each one is approximately the size of a ground vehicle. They appear to be armed with cutting beams and explosive charges. How many? The sensor officer looked at his screen for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Approximately 40,000. The drones hit the fleet like a swarm of insects attacking a herd of large animals. They were too small for the main weapons to target effectively. They were too fast for the point defense systems to track. They attached themselves to the hulls of the warships and began cutting through the armor with their beams, opening holes that let the vacuum of space rush in. When they had cut deep enough, they detonated their explosive charges, and ships that had taken years to build were destroyed in seconds. Vorat watched as 3 of his heavy cruisers broke apart under the drone assault. Their explosions lit up the space around Haven like brief, angry suns. He could hear the screams of his soldiers on the communication channels. He could hear the panic spreading through the fleet like a disease. And through it all, the human colony sat on the planet below, its farms burning but its people alive, its message still echoing on the open channel. Come and take it. Vorat gripped the arms of his command chair until his knuckles turned white. He looked at the map of human space on his screen. Haven was the first system, the smallest, the weakest. If this was what a farming colony could do to his fleet, what was waiting for them deeper inside human territory? He did not know the answer yet, but he was beginning to understand the warnings. He was beginning to understand why the Thessani whispered, why the Kelvori refused. Why the Merchant Guild drew lines on their maps and said, "Do not cross." The humans were not a young species stumbling through the galaxy. They were something else. Something that had learned to fight in the worst classroom the universe could offer. They had learned to fight each other. And in doing so, they had become something that the galaxy was not prepared for. The Battle of Haven was only 6 hours old, and the Draenari had already lost over 400 ships. There were still 9,600 left. But for the first time in his long career, High Commander Vorath looked at his fleet and wondered if it was enough. Deep inside human space, on a world called Earth, in a room buried beneath a mountain, a woman sat in front of a wall of screens. Her name was Admiral Chen Wei, and she was the commander of the United Human Defense Initiative. She was small and quiet, with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that had seen too many wars to be surprised by another one. She watched the data streaming in from Haven and allowed herself a small nod. The first phase had worked. The Draenari had walked into the trap exactly as predicted. Their arrogance had done half the work. An aide approached her. "Admiral, Haven reports the enemy is regrouping. They still have over 9,000 ships. Chen Wei looked at the map of human space. She had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 3 years of building hidden defenses. 3 years of developing weapons that no one in the galaxy had ever seen. 3 years of turning every human colony into a fortress disguised as a farm, a mine, or a quiet little town. Good, she said. Let them regroup. Let them think Haven was our best effort. Let them think they have seen what we can do. She touched a control on her panel, and a map zoomed out to show all of human space, every system, every colony, every moon and asteroid and station. And on each one, small red dots that represented weapons and defenses that the Draenari had not yet discovered. They brought 10,000 ships, she said softly. They think that is a lot. She looked at her aide and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this fight for a very long time. Show them what we have been building. High Commander Vorath had never retreated from a battle in his life. He had fought the Kelvori in the frozen wastes of their homeworld. He had crushed the Thessani rebellion in the burning deserts of Thessan Prime. He had personally led boarding parties onto enemy ships and killed their captains with his bare hands. He was not a creature who understood fear. But as the fires of Haven still glowed on his rear senses, and the count of his lost ships climbed past 400, something new was growing inside him. It was not fear. Not exactly. It was the slow, terrible realization that he had been wrong. He had been wrong about the humans. He had been wrong about this war, and he was beginning to suspect that the price of being wrong was going to be far higher than anyone in the Draenari Empire had imagined. He pulled the fleet back from Haven and held position in open space between the colony and the next human system. He needed time. Time to repair his damaged ships. Time to reorganize his forces. Time to understand what had just happened. Selthar stood before him on the bridge, and the young officer's confidence was gone. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly at his sides. He had watched 90,000 Draenari soldiers die in minutes, and the experience had carved something out of him that would never grow back. How did they hide those weapons? Vorath demanded. Our scans showed nothing. No energy signatures, no metal deposits. Nothing. Selthar swallowed hard. We have analyzed the wreckage recovered from the battle. The human weapons platforms were built using materials that absorb sensor energy instead of reflecting it. They were powered by geothermal sources deep underground, which made them invisible to thermal scanning. And the platforms themselves were assembled in pieces over several years and only connected at the last moment. Each individual piece was too small to register as a weapon system. They planned this, Vorath said. They knew we were coming. It appears so, High Commander. The humans have been monitoring our fleet movements for at least 2 years. They intercepted our communications. They broke our encryption codes. They knew the exact date and route of our invasion before we even gave the final order. Vorath leaned back in his chair. The humans had known for 2 years and they had said nothing. They had not tried to negotiate. They had not sought allies. They had not begged the Galactic Council for protection. They had simply watched and waited and built their traps in silence. That kind of patience was not something he associated with a young species. That was the patience of a predator. What do we know about their military commander? He asked. Selthar brought up a file on the screen. A photograph showed a small human female with grey hair and a face that revealed nothing. Admiral Chen Wei. She is 63 years old by human standards. She served in 3 separate human conflicts before being appointed to lead their unified defense force. She is considered by her own people to be one of the most brilliant military strategists in their history. Vorath studied the photograph. She looked so small, so fragile. He could have crushed her with one hand. And yet this small creature had just killed more of his soldiers in a single afternoon than any enemy he had ever faced. We continue the advance, Vorath said. Selthar looked at him with something close to horror. High Commander, with respect, perhaps we should reconsider. The losses at Haven were significant, and if every human system is similarly defended, we continue, Vorath said, and his tone made it clear that the discussion was over. He could not retreat. The Draenari did not retreat. If he turned back now, the Empire would see it as weakness, and weakness in the Draenari Empire was a death sentence. Other commanders would challenge him. Other species would sense opportunity. The entire structure of Draenari power, built over 9,000 years, rested on the simple principle that they never backed down. So they went forward, and the humans were waiting. The second system on their path was called New Helsinki. It was a mining colony built into the asteroid belt of a red dwarf star. According to intelligence, it had a population of 50,000 miners and a small security force equipped with basic weapons. Vorath did not make the same mistake twice. He did not send transports first. Instead, he sent his warships ahead in a wide formation, scanning everything, every asteroid, every piece of debris, every shadow. His sensor officers worked around the clock, looking for the hidden weapons that had destroyed them at Haven. They found nothing. The asteroid belt appeared to be exactly what it looked like. Rocks and ice and dust scattered across millions of kilometers of empty space. The mining stations were visible on their sensors, small metal structures clinging to the surfaces of the larger asteroids. There were no hidden weapons platforms, no buried defense systems, no swarms of drones waiting to be unleashed. Selthar reported this to Vorath with visible relief. It appears New Helsinki does not have the same defenses as Haven. Perhaps Haven was unique. Perhaps the humans concentrated their resources there. Vorath did not believe that. But he had no evidence to support his doubt, and the fleet was watching. He ordered the advance. The warships moved into the asteroid belt in a careful formation, maintaining wide spacing to avoid being caught in a crossfire. They moved slowly, sensors at maximum range, weapons charged and ready. Nothing happened. The asteroids drifted past them in silence. The mining stations showed no signs of activity. The humans appeared to have evacuated. They were halfway through the belt when the asteroids began to move. Not all of them. Not at first. But here and there, among the thousands of rocks that filled the belt, certain asteroids began to change course. They moved slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, adjusting their orbits by fractions of degrees. But those small adjustments added up, and within minutes the drifting pattern of the belt had changed. Corridors that had been open were now closing. Spaces that had been empty were now filling with rock. The asteroids are moving. The sensor officer reported, confusion clear in his voice. Natural gravitational shifts, or not natural, Borath said. He understood immediately. The humans had put engines on the asteroids, small, hidden propulsion systems that could nudge the massive rocks onto new trajectories. The entire asteroid belt was a weapon, and his fleet was inside it. All ships full reverse, he ordered. Get out of the belt, now. But it was too late. The asteroids were closing in from all directions, and between them, something else was emerging. Ships, not the large warships that the Draenari had expected. These were small, fast, and ugly. They looked like they had been built in a hurry from whatever materials were available. Mining ships converted into gunboats, cargo haulers fitted with missile racks, even personal shuttles with welded-on armor plates and jury-rigged weapons. There were hundreds of them, and they came pouring out of the asteroid belt like hornets from a disturbed nest. The Draenari opened fire immediately, and their weapons were devastating. Each shot from a Draenari warship could destroy one of the human vessels in a single hit. The small ships shattered like glass, spilling debris and bodies into the void. In the first minute, the Draenari destroyed over 60 of them. But the humans did not stop. They did not slow down. They did not turn back. They flew straight at the Draenari fleet with a kind of fury that Vorath had never seen before. They knew they were going to die. Every pilot in every one of those small, fragile ships knew that they were flying into their own death. And they did it anyway. They got close. Impossibly close. Close enough to fire their crude weapons at point-blank range into the gaps in the Draenari armor. Close enough to ram their ships directly into the hulls of the warships. Close enough to detonate their entire fuel supplies against the engines of the cruisers. It was not a battle. It was something more primal than that. It was the fury of a species that had decided it would rather die fighting than live on its knees. And it was effective. Not because the human weapons were powerful. They were not. But because the humans were willing to pay a price that the Draenari had never encountered. They were willing to trade their lives, one for one, ship for ship, knowing that they would lose more than they killed, and accepting that cost without hesitation. In the chaos of the asteroid belt, with rocks closing in from all sides and human ships attacking from every direction, the Draenari fleet began to fracture. Ships that tried to maintain formation were hit by asteroids. Ships that broke formation to avoid the rocks were swarmed by the human gunboats, and all the while, the belt was tightening, the corridors narrowing, the space between the asteroids shrinking, until the massive Draenari warships could barely maneuver. Vorath lost 600 ships in the Battle of New Helsinki. 600 warships destroyed by miners in converted cargo ships and rocks with engines strapped to them. It was humiliating. It was devastating. And it was exactly what Admiral Chen Wei had planned. On Earth, in her underground command center, Chen Wei watched the battle unfold on her screens. She saw the human casualty reports coming in, and each number was a weight on her shoulders. She had sent those miners into battle knowing that most of them would not come back. She had asked them to fight with tools instead of weapons, to die so that the fleet would bleed a little more. An aide brought her tea, and she held the cup in both hands without drinking. The warmth of it was the only comfort she allowed herself. New Helsinki, held for 4 hours, the aide reported. Enemy losses confirmed, at 612 ships. Our losses are almost total. The colony is gone. Chen Wei closed her eyes. Almost total. The words meant that 50,000 people were dead or scattered, homes destroyed, lives ended, all to delay the Draenari fleet for a few hours and reduce their numbers by 6%. That is what they asked of us, she said quietly. The miners volunteered, every single one of them. They knew what it meant. She opened her eyes and looked at the map. The Draenari fleet was still moving forward, but it was smaller now, wounded. And it was heading exactly where she wanted it to go. The third system in the Draenari path was Proxima Station, the largest human settlement outside the Sol system. It orbited Proxima Centauri, the closest star to Earth, and it was home to nearly 3 million people. It was the jewel of the human colonies, a massive ring station that circled the star like a silver bracelet, filled with parks and schools and hospitals, and all the things that humans built when they wanted to make a place feel like home. Vorath expected Proxima to be the most heavily defended position in human space. He approached it with extreme caution, spreading his remaining fleet across a wide front and scanning continuously for traps. He had learned from Haven. He had learned from New Helsinki. He would not be caught off guard again. But Proxima Station was different. There were no hidden weapons, no converted mining ships. Instead, as the Draenari fleet approached, they received a transmission. Not a challenge, not a threat, a negotiation request. The face that appeared on Vorath's screen belonged to a human male. He was older, with dark skin and white hair, and he wore civilian clothes instead of a military uniform. He introduced himself as Governor James Okonkwo, the elected leader of Proxima Station. "High Commander," Okonkwo said. His voice was calm and measured. "I am authorized to discuss terms." Vorath stared at the screen. After Haven and New Helsinki, after the traps and the ambushes and the suicide attacks, a human was offering to negotiate. He did not trust it, but he was also curious, and his fleet needed time to regroup. "Speak," he said. "You have come into our space with a fleet of warships," Okonkwo said. "You have been met with resistance at every step. Your losses have been significant. I am offering you an alternative to continued conflict. Surrender?" Vorath asked. "No," Okonkwo said. "Not surrender. Understanding. I want to show you something, High Commander. Something that I believe will change your perspective on this war. I do not need my perspective changed. I need your species to submit." Okonkwo smiled. It was a sad smile, full of knowledge that he seemed to wish he did not have. "High Commander, I am going to transmit a data package to your ship. It contains information that we have never shared with any alien species. I ask only that you review it before you make your next decision." Vorath almost refused. Almost. But something about the human's calm certainty stopped him. This was not the desperation of a defeated enemy. This was something else. This was the quiet confidence of someone who held a card that had not yet been played. "Send it," Vorath said. The data package arrived and was immediately quarantined by Draenari security protocols. It was scanned for viruses, for tracking software, for any kind of weapon or trap. It was clean. Just data. Files and images and recordings organized neatly and labeled in the common galactic language. Vorath opened the first file, and his world changed. It was a history, a complete, unedited history of human warfare. Not the sanitized version that the humans shared with the galactic community, the real version. Every war, every weapon, every strategy and tactic and atrocity that the human species had ever committed against itself. He saw images of trenches stretching across continents filled with the dead. He saw cities burning under firebombs, the flames so intense that they created their own wind. He saw the mushroom cloud of a nuclear weapon, rising over a city of civilians, and the shadow burns of people who had been vaporized so quickly that their silhouettes were etched into stone walls. He saw biological weapons, chemical weapons. He saw machines designed to kill on an industrial scale, factories of death that processed human beings like raw materials. He saw the numbers. 2 world wars. 60 million dead in one, 70 million in another. A Cold War that lasted decades, during which both sides built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their entire planet several times over, and they had come close. More than once, the humans had stood on the edge of their own extinction, finger on the button, ready to end everything. And then he saw the modern files, the weapons that humans had developed after they reached the stars, the things they had built in secret, in laboratories buried deep underground and in facilities hidden in the dark spaces between stars. Weapons that made nuclear bombs look like toys, weapons that could tear the fabric of space itself. Weapons that the humans had built not because they wanted to use them, but because they had learned from their own history that the only way to prevent a war was to make the cost of starting one unthinkable. Vorath sat in his chair for a long time after reviewing the files. The bridge was silent around him. His officers had received copies of the data, and they too were quiet, staring at their screens with expressions that ranged from disbelief to outright terror. Selphar was the first to speak. "This cannot be real. No species would develop weapons like this." "Not against their own kind. It is real," Vorath said. He knew it was real because no one would fabricate such a history. No species would invent such horrors to use as a bluff. The images were too detailed, the data too consistent, the records too complete. This was the truth of what humanity was, and it was more terrifying than anything the Drenari had ever imagined. Governor Okonkwo's face reappeared on the screen. He looked tired. Sharing this information had not been easy for him. Humans did not like to remember what they were capable of. "Now you understand," Okonkwo said. "You are not fighting a species that learned warfare from conquering others. You are fighting a species that learned warfare from trying to destroy itself. Every weapon we have, every tactic, every strategy was forged in conflicts against the most dangerous enemy we have ever faced, ourselves. You brought 10,000 ships into our space, High Commander. You thought that was an overwhelming force. But we have spent our entire history preparing for enemies far more dangerous than you." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentle, almost kind. "Go home, High Commander. Take your ships and your soldiers and go home. Tell your empire what you found here. Tell them that the humans are not a young species waiting to be conquered. We are an old species, in a young body. We have already fought the worst wars the universe has to offer. We fought them against ourselves, and we survived. You will not beat us, not because we are stronger than you, but because we have already survived worse than anything you can do to us." Vorath stared at the screen. He stared at the data still displayed on his side panels. He stared at the images of mushroom clouds and burning cities and trenches full of the dead. And for the first time in his long, violent life, he felt something that he had no word for in his language. It was not fear. It was not respect. It was the sudden, overwhelming understanding that he had walked into the home of something ancient and terrible, something that wore the mask of farmers and miners and quiet governors. But beneath that mask was a species that had stared into its own extinction and come back with weapons built from the memory of its own darkness. He closed the data files. He looked at his fleet, now reduced to barely 9,000 ships. He looked at the map of human space, with all its hidden defenses and secret weapons and converted mining ships and volunteers willing to die. And he made his decision. "Continue the advance," he said. "Target Proxima Station." Because the Draenari did not retreat, not even when they should. Governor Okonkwo watched the Draenari fleet begin its approach. He had hoped. He had genuinely hoped that the truth would be enough. He turned to his aide and nodded once. "Send the signal to Admiral Chen Wei. Tell her they chose the hard way. On Earth, Chen Wei received the message. She set down her tea and stood up. Around her, the command center came alive with activity. Screens lit up. Officers took their stations. Communications channels opened to every human colony, every hidden base, every secret facility in the darkness between the stars. "All systems," she said, and her voice carried across light years. Isolation code confirmed. Begin Phase 3. Across human space in places that the Draenari had not yet reached, something began to wake up. Something that the humans had prayed they would never have to use. Something built from the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, from the trenches of Verdun, from the gas chambers and the gulags, and every dark lesson that humanity had ever learned about the true cost of war. The humans had shown the Draenari what they were. They had given them a chance to turn back. The Draenari had refused, and now the humans were going to show them what they could do. Phase 3 began in silence. There was no dramatic announcement. No battle cry broadcast across the stars. Admiral Chen Wei simply pressed a sequence of keys on her console, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, machines that had been sleeping for years opened their eyes. The first thing the Draenari noticed was that their communication stopped working. Not all at once. It happened gradually, like a candle flame dying in a slow wind. First, the long-range channels went quiet. Then the medium-range signals became garbled. Then the short-range links between ships started to break apart, filling with static and ghost signals and fragments of conversations that no one was having. Within 30 minutes, the entire Draenari fleet was deaf and blind, each ship isolated in its own bubble of silence. Vorath stood on the bridge of the unkindness and watched his communication board go dark, one channel at a time. He had seen electronic warfare before. Every advanced species used some form of signal disruption in combat, but this was different. This was not disruption. This was erasure. The humans had not jammed his signals. They had somehow reached into the electromagnetic spectrum itself and removed the frequencies his fleet used, the way someone might pluck individual strings from a musical instrument. "Switch to backup frequencies," he ordered. "We have, High Commander," the communications officer said. His voice was tight with controlled panic. "All backup frequencies are also affected. We are cycling through emergency channels, but they are being neutralized as fast as we activate them. How is that possible?" No one on the bridge had an answer. In the silence that followed, the second phase of the human attack began. The Draenari fleet was still approaching Proxima Station, spread across a wide front of several million kilometers. With their communications severed, each ship was operating independently, following the last orders they had received before the blackout. Those orders were to advance. So they advanced, moving forward into human space, like a herd of animals walking into a canyon without knowing that the walls were about to close. The attacks came from directions that should not have been possible. Ships on the outer edge of the formation reported impacts from weapons that seemed to appear out of empty space. There were no energy signatures, no approaching projectiles, no warning of any kind. One moment, a Draenari cruiser would be flying in perfect formation. The next moment, a hole the size of a building would appear in its hull, punched clean through from one side to the other, and the ship would break apart in a shower of molten metal and frozen atmosphere. Vorath watched through his viewports as the cruiser's relentless will died in exactly this way. A hole appeared in its midsection, perfectly circular, edges glowing white-hot. The ship folded around the wound like a piece of paper being crumpled by an invisible hand. Its reactor containment failed 3 seconds later, and the resulting explosion vaporized everything within 1,000 kilometers. "What weapon does that?" Selthar whispered. He was standing at the viewport beside Vorath, and his face had the look of someone watching something that could not be real. Vorath did not answer. He did not know. In 9,000 years of warfare, the Draenari had never encountered a weapon that could strike without any detectable energy signature, from any direction, with that kind of precision. It was as if the humans had found a way to reach through space itself and touch their ships with a finger of pure destruction. The attacks increased in frequency. Every few minutes, another ship would die. Sometimes it was a cruiser, sometimes a destroyer. Once it was a troop carrier holding 12,000 soldiers, and the hole that killed it passed through the exact center of the ship, through the barracks deck, through the mess hall, through the medical bay, killing every living thing on board in less than a second. Vorath realized that the humans were not trying to destroy his fleet through brute force. They were bleeding it. Slowly, methodically, taking one ship at a time, in a pattern designed to maximize terror while minimizing the expenditure of whatever weapon they were using. It was psychological warfare on a scale he had never experienced. Each ship that died was a message. We can reach you. We can touch you. We can kill you whenever we choose, and there is nothing you can do to stop us. He tried to rally his fleet. He sent runners between ships, small shuttles carrying physical messages since electronic communication was impossible. He ordered the fleet to tighten its formation, to present a harder target, to activate every defensive system they had, but there was no defense against a weapon you could not see, could not detect, and could not understand. By the time the fleet reached Proxima Station, Vorath had lost another 300 ships to the invisible attacks. His fleet was down to approximately 8,600 vessels, and the morale of his crews was shattered. Soldiers who had conquered worlds without flinching were now jumping at shadows, flinching at every sound, staring at their own hulls and wondering if the next invisible strike would come through the wall beside them. And then they reached Proxima Station, and what they found was not what they expected. The station was empty. All 3 million residents had been evacuated. The great ring that circled the star was dark and silent, its parks abandoned, its schools closed, its hospitals stripped of equipment. The humans had not stayed to defend it. They had simply left, taking everything of value with them and leaving behind a hollow shell. Belfast scanned the station thoroughly. No weapons, no traps, no explosives. It is completely empty. Vorath stared at the dark station. Something was wrong. The humans had defended Haven with hidden weapons. They had defended New Helsinki with converted ships and moving asteroids. They had shown him their history and warned him to turn back. And now, at their largest colony, they had simply walked away. It is a message, Vorath said slowly. He understood it with the clarity that comes from decades of military experience. The humans were telling him something. They were saying that Proxima Station did not matter, that buildings and structures and physical locations did not matter, that the humans could abandon their homes and still fight, that they were not defending territory. They were defending an idea. And you cannot conquer an idea by occupying the ground it used to stand on. Search the station, he ordered. Find anything useful. Then we continue to their homeworld, Earth. The word hung in the air. Earth, the cradle of humanity. The birthplace of the species that have built weapons from their own nightmares and hidden them in the soil of their farms. If anywhere held the answers to what the humans truly were, it was Earth. The fleet moved on, leaving Proxima Station behind like a discarded shell. The invisible attacks continued as they traveled, picking off ships with relentless patience. 3 here, 5 there. A heavy cruiser in the middle of the night cycle killed so quietly that no one on the surrounding ships noticed until they saw the debris cloud spreading through their formation like dark blood in water. Vorath stopped sleeping. He sat in his command chair around the clock, watching his fleet shrink, counting the losses, and trying to understand the enemy he was facing. He studied the human history files that Governor Okonkwo had sent him. He read about their wars in detail, not just the weapons and the numbers, but the strategies, the philosophies, the way humans thought about conflict. He found a concept that the humans called defense in depth. It was a strategy as old as their civilization. Instead of meeting an enemy at the border with everything you had, you let them in. You let them advance. You let them stretch their supply lines and spread their forces thin. And then you attack them from every direction, at every point, in ways they did not expect, until their advance ground to a halt and their army collapsed under its own weight. That was what the humans were doing. Haven had been the first layer, New Helsinki the second, the invisible weapons the third. Each layer cost the Drenari more ships, more soldiers, more confidence, and each layer revealed a little more about what the humans were capable of. Each revelation more terrifying than the last. But Vorath also found something else in the human files, something that disturbed him more than any weapon. He found records of human endurance, stories of human soldiers who had fought for days without sleep, civilians who had survived years in prison camps and emerged to rebuild their nations, entire cities that had been bombed to rubble and rebuilt within a generation. The humans had a capacity for suffering that went beyond anything Vorath had ever encountered. They could absorb punishment that would break any other species, and they could keep going. They could keep fighting. They could take the worst the universe had to offer and come back for more. This was not bravery. Bravery was a temporary thing, A flash of courage in a moment of crisis. This was something deeper. This was a species-wide refusal to give up, built into their very nature, burned into them by thousands of years of conflict and hardship and survival. The humans did not fight because they wanted to. They fought because they did not know how to stop. The fleet crossed the last stretch of space between Proxima and Sol, and the losses mounted. By the time the yellow light of the human sun appeared on their sensors, Vorath had fewer than 8,000 ships. He had started with 10,000. In less than 2 weeks of fighting, the humans had destroyed over 2,000 warships, and the Draenari had not yet managed to kill a single human military vessel. Every ship they had destroyed had been a civilian conversion, a mining boat, a cargo hauler. The actual human navy, such as it was, had not yet shown itself. The Sol system opened before them like a dark garden. The outer planets drifted in their ancient orbits, vast and cold. Jupiter, Saturn, the gas giants that the humans had not yet colonized but had seeded with monitoring stations and refueling depots. The Draenari fleet moved through the outer system in a tight formation, sensors straining, weapons ready. And there, in the space between Jupiter and the asteroid belt, the human navy was waiting. There were not 800 ships, as Draenari intelligence had estimated. There were over 4,000. They had come from everywhere. From hidden shipyards in the asteroid belt, from underground facilities on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, from deep space stations that no alien sensor had ever detected. They were a mix of dedicated warships and armed civilian vessels, all of them arranged in a formation that Vorath recognized immediately. It was a crescent, a classic human battle formation, designed to envelop an attacking force and destroy it from 3 sides simultaneously. At the center of the crescent was a ship that made Vorath's breath catch in his throat. It was enormous, not as large as the Unkindness, but close, and it radiated an energy signature that his senses could not identify. It was something new, something that did not match any known technology, Draenari or otherwise. A communication channel opened. Somehow, despite the electronic warfare that had silenced the Draenari fleet for days, this single channel cut through the static with crystal clarity. The face that appeared on Vorath's screen was Admiral Chen Wei. She looked exactly as her photograph had shown her. Small, quiet, grey-haired, unremarkable in every physical way. But her eyes held something that made Vorath's chest tighten. They held certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the other side to realize it. "High Commander Vorath," she said, "you have come a long way. You have lost many ships and many soldiers. I want you to know that their courage is acknowledged. They fought well, and they died bravely, and we honor their sacrifice." Vorath was momentarily stunned. She was honoring his dead. The enemy commander was paying respect to the soldiers he had lost? In 9,000 years of Draenari warfare, no enemy had ever done that. Enemies begged. Enemies threatened. Enemies cursed and screamed and spat defiance. They did not offer quiet respect for the fallen. "I did not come here for your respect," Vorath said. "No," Chen Wei agreed. "You came here to conquer us, to add us to your empire, to make us kneel." She paused. "I am going to give you one final chance to leave, not because I am afraid of your fleet. As you can see, we are prepared for it. But because I have read about your species too, High Commander. I know that the Draenari are more than their empire. I know that your people have art and music and traditions that go back thousands of years. I do not want to destroy that. I do not want to be the reason that Draenari children grow up without fathers." Her voice softened, and for a moment she was not a military commander. She was a grandmother, a teacher, a human being who had seen too much death and wanted desperately for this to end without more. "Go home," she said. "Please." The bridge of the Unkindness was silent. Every officer, every technician, every soldier on duty was watching the screen, watching this small human woman ask them, gently and sincerely, to save themselves. Vorath looked at her for a long time. He thought about Haven, about New Helsinki, about the invisible weapons and the empty station and the 4,000 ships arrayed before him. He thought about the history files, the nuclear weapons, the world wars, the trenches and the camps and the burned cities. He thought about his own soldiers scattered across the void, isolated and afraid, dying to weapons they could not see or understand. And then he gave the order that would end the war. All ships, open fire. The Battle of Seoul lasted 11 hours. It was the largest space battle in recorded galactic history, and it would remain so for centuries. 8,000 Draenari warships against 4,000 human vessels, fighting in the space between Jupiter and Mars, surrounded by the debris of shattered ships and the frozen bodies of the dead. The Draenari fought with everything they had. They were warriors, born and bred for combat, and they threw themselves into the battle with the fury of a species that had never known defeat. Their weapons were powerful. Their ships were strong. Their soldiers were brave beyond measure. But the humans fought like something that had climbed out of hell and brought the fire with them. The great ship at the center of the human formation, the one with the unknown energy signature, activated its primary weapon in the third hour of the battle. No one who survived could adequately describe what happened. The nearest approximation was that space itself seemed to fold around the Draenari ships, crushing them like paper, compressing matter until it ceased to exist. 300 ships died in the first firing, 200 more in the second. The weapon operated in pulses, each one sweeping across the battlefield like the hand of an angry god. Vorath watched his fleet die around him and felt the walls of his world collapsing. The unkindness was taking fire from all directions. Its shields were failing. Its armor was cracked. Fires burned on 16 decks, and the screams of the wounded filled the corridors. Selthar was dead. He had been killed when a human missile had penetrated the bridge's outer hull, and the explosion had thrown him against the far wall with enough force to end him instantly. Vorath had not had time to mourn. There was no time for anything except the cold mechanical process of fighting a battle that was already lost. In the 9th hour, with fewer than 1,000 Draenari ships still functional, Vorath finally gave the order that his species had never given in 9,000 years of warfare. Retreat. All surviving ships retreat, maximum speed. Get out of human space! The surviving Draenari ships turned and ran. They fled through the Sol system, past the outer planets, past the monitoring stations, past the invisible boundary of human space, and out into the galaxy beyond. The humans did not pursue. They let them go. Chenwei watched them flee on her screens and felt no joy, only exhaustion, only grief for all the dead on both sides. Of the 10,000 ships that had entered human space, fewer than 300 made it back to Draenari territory. Some had been damaged so badly that they collapsed during the journey home, their crews dying in the cold silence between stars. Others carried soldiers so traumatized that they never spoke again, spending the rest of their lives staring at walls with empty eyes, reliving the horrors they had witnessed over and over until their minds simply stopped. Vorath survived. The unkindness, battered and broken, limped back to the Draenari homeworld with less than a third of its crew alive. Vorath stood on its damaged bridge as it entered orbit, looking down at his own world, and he felt like a stranger. Everything he had believed about the universe, about his empire, about the natural order of things, had been burned away in the fires of human space. He was summoned before the Draenari High Council to explain his defeat. He stood in the great hall where victories had been celebrated for millennia, and he told them the truth. He told them about Haven and the hidden weapons, about New Helsinki and the mining ships, about the invisible attacks and the empty station and the battle at Seoul. He told them about the human history files, about the nuclear weapons, about the world wars and the trenches and the gas chambers. And when he was finished, he said something that the Draenari had never said about any species in their entire history. Do not go back. Do not provoke them. Do not test them. The humans are not what we thought they were. They are not a young species waiting to be conquered. They are the survivors of the most brutal evolutionary process any world has ever produced. They have been fighting since before they could walk upright, and they have turned that fighting into an art form that we cannot match. Our empire is built on strength. Theirs is built on something worse. Theirs is built on the refusal to die. The council was silent for a long time. Then the eldest member, a Draenari so old that his scales had turned white, spoke in a voice like dry leaves. We will mark their space on our maps. We will draw a line around it, and we will write a warning. And that warning will say, do not enter, do not provoke, do not test. Here there be humans. The warning was added to every Draenari star chart. It spread through the galaxy within months, passed from species to species, merchant to merchant, explorer to explorer. It became the most famous warning in galactic history, repeated in 1,000 languages on 1,000 worlds. And on Earth, Admiral Chen Wei retired from the military. She moved to a small house by the sea, where the sound of the waves helped her sleep. She planted a garden. She read books. She tried to forget the war, though she never could. On quiet nights, she would sit on her porch and look up at the stars, and she would think about the Draenari commander who had chosen to fight instead of leaving, and she would feel a deep, tired sadness for all the lives that had been lost because one empire could not imagine losing. She kept a single memento from the war, a small data chip containing the last communication she had received from the miners of New Helsinki before they had launched their converted ships into the Draenari fleet. It was a short message sent by the colony leader, a woman named Elsa Virtanen, who had been the first to volunteer for the defense. The message said, "We are farmers and miners. We are not soldiers, but we are human. And that will have to be enough." Chen Wei kept that message for the rest of her life. She read it every morning with her tea, and every morning it reminded her of the same truth that Vorath had learned in the fires of battle, that the Draenari Council had carved into their maps, that the entire galaxy would eventually come to understand. It was always enough. Being human was always enough. The galaxy moved on. Empires rose and fell. Species evolved and died and were replaced by new ones. But the warning remained on the maps, and the story of the 10,000 ships was told and retold across the stars, growing with each telling until it became legend. And the legend always ended the same way. 10,000 ships entered human space. Almost none returned. And the galaxy learned, once and for all, that some borders are not meant to be crossed, some species are not meant to be tested, and some warnings, no matter how quietly they are spoken, should always, always be believed.